This is a loosely coupled show with James Hickey and Derek Comartin. We talk about software architecture and design. In this episode, we have guest Fran Méndez to talk about AsyncAPI, what it is, how it came to be, and the future with its partnership with Postman. I want to kind of get into just what is it, but then I'm more curious of where I was leading this to is the beginning and where this came to be, how it came to be, etc. But let's just start off maybe like for people completely uninitiated to it, what is AsyncAPI?
So AsyncAPI is a specification, much like OpenAPI and Swagger for REST APIs. But in this case, the focus is on messaging on event-driven architectures, right? So I will say that AsyncAPI is a specification for event-driven architectures, let's say. Let's put that simple. And also, I also always love to include the tooling, not just the spec, right? So we take care of the core tooling as well, not just only the definition of the language, but also the parsers and some core tooling.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a big part of it, because it feels like anytime I've ever had the conversation about hypermedia and related to REST, the comment I always hear is, well, what about tooling? What about tooling? What about tooling? Like that seems to be always the thing about it. So I can understand how, yeah, for adoption, that tooling plays a big role in it.
Indeed, actually, I'm coming from the same place, let's say, as you. That was the main reason that we decided to go and maintain core tooling on the initiative, on the AsyncAPI initiative, if we want, and also because we want not just adoption, but once people adopted the spec and you launch a new version, you want people to upgrade seamlessly, right? You don't want people to be stuck at the version 1 or version 2 when you are on version 8, right? It will be seamless for them, and that's why we want to be offering this facade, which is the core tooling. For us, it's like we see it as a facade that by itself it doesn't provide any value to the user or to the end user, but for people creating tooling for or products, it has a tremendous value, right? Because like I said, it serves as a facade between the end user product and the spec, right?
Yeah, so I remember, I don't know how early it was when I first seen a mention of it. I think it was from you, or I seen a retweet. I can't remember where I seen kind of AsyncAPI. I think it was pretty early on. And that's how I started following you, because I sent a message, you replied to it. And so let's just backtrack, because where I was going with this initially was, so what was that, 2 years ago?
Actually, a bit more.
Okay.
It was almost 4 years now. Yeah, 4 years.
Okay.
Not almost,
So it's
more than 4 years.
2 years minus 2020, which is like 2 years worth, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it feels like.
Actually, maybe it's really bad for some people to listen to this, but it was a really good year for us. So, except for the pandemic, which obviously has been a really bad thing for everyone, right? Except Jeff Bezos. So it's been a really good year for us. Like we've accomplished a lot of things. So yeah.
So before we get into that, because I mean you had that big announcement, let's jump back to 4 years ago, and what kind of kicked all this off? Like, where was your motivation? What was obviously there's a need, because you can tell by what's happening now with it. I think a lot of people are interested in it. So, like, what was it 4 years ago that kicked all this off? Like, what's the backstory, I guess?
So the backstory is really, I will say, simple. we were offering a product at Hitch. Hitch was a startup that my friend Bruno Petro co-founded. It was also known as API Changelog. And we were offering a product on top of OpenAPI, right? We were offering a changelog, and then after that, we offered more stuff on top of OpenAPI. So we were telling our customers to please use OpenAPI and document their APIs with, or define, not document, their APIs with OpenAPI. And we were doing this ourselves for our internal APIs, for our external API as well. But our internal architecture was event-driven. It's a changelog, right? It's driven by changes, and changes are events that happen. So we were architecting like almost everything as an event-driven architecture with RabbitMQ in the middle. And we couldn't do all these cool things that we were able to do with OpenAPI, which is generating code, generating docs, validating certain input on the validating the input of the request and the output of the response, all these things. And we tried, or I would say like I tried myself because at that time it was just an experiment. And I tried at this time to, let's say, hack a little bit OpenAPI, and we were just having like a kind of internal guidelines. If you see get, this means subscribe. If you see post, this means publish. Right? Well, kind of did work at the time for documentation during probably 1 month, not more. But then we wanted to start generating code, and yeah, that's not gonna work. That's not that easy. So it's like this feels like a huge hack. We need to do something differently. So I asked OpenAPI. Actually, you can see the issues. The issues are still there, and I'm there asking for help, and asking them explicitly if they are looking to add support for messaging protocols, not just HTTP. And when I was going there to ask, always what I found was other people already asking before myself, and always getting the same response, no, which I understand, and I completely really understand and respect, because that's a huge mess. If you suddenly make OpenAPI support multiple protocols, this will be a huge mess. And yeah, that's how it all started. Because we couldn't use OpenAPI, I decided to just fork it and start replacing what didn't make sense to me for messaging, and adding what was missing for me. And it was literally for me, right? It wasn't for the rest of the people or anything. It was just for me, for us, actually, in the company, which we were, I don't know, like 4 or 5 engineers. We were a small startup. So yeah, that's how it all started. It was serving the purpose. We had to create, of course, documentation generators from scratch and code generators from scratch. And I just continued, and my behavior by default is always publish everything as open source. And then if someone wants to jump in and contribute, fine. If not, okay, one more dev project there. Why not? So yeah.
No, that makes sense, because I could have guessed that was the outcome, is you needed it. Like, there was something that you needed. It seems like the way that anything really successful takes off is you had a need personally. It's like, well,
yeah.
It's I guess where I think of it is, it makes sense to me that you did it because you needed it. But what you said, I think, was interesting, and this fills in a little bit of a gap for me, is that other people were posting issues asking for the exact same thing. And that's always the thing I think of, is I thought about this, not probably like in a very deep way before, but that's why when I seen it, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Like, why does this not exist yet? Like, this should be a thing. Because it was a pain point for myself, but just not. I didn't ever really had the realization how much of a pain in the ass it was, or what it could be. And you know what I mean. So you like when you started. It's interesting that you started using OpenAPI for a little bit to try to fill the gap of what the pain was, and then say, okay, obviously this isn't going to work. But it makes sense that there was other people that you noticed other people's posting that issue or issues like that, saying, hey, we're trying to do something like this, but for messages. And what were some of the other like, did you know, were other people trying to do it as well with OpenAPI and kind of like shoehorning it in there, or?
So people were that there's like a disparate set of options here, let's say, or situations here. Like some people were doing the same as I did, like they just needed it for documentation, so they went into the documentation generator and hacked the word post to replace it for publish. So you use post on the OpenAPI document, but the result will be publish. So well, it works. Kind of works, right? But most people were just like, no, it doesn't exist, so I'm not going to hack it. And yeah, so just people were just doing this manually as we used to do with REST APIs in the beginning. Like you had nothing, you have to just jump in and code, and that's it, and document it yourself the best you can, and that's it, if at all.
Yeah, if at all, yeah.
Do you guys want to highlight just like really quickly, like imagine I'm like, I'm a developer in a company and we're using some sort of messaging. You mentioned RabbitMQ, right? What specific problems would you say were like the biggest problems? I mean, for me, I can imagine it's if you've got like multiple departments or whatever, like to some degree, you need to tell them, okay, we are sending these events to you, right? If a payment is successful, I need to tell the warehousing department or shipping or whoever, like, this is the event that you should expect to get. I mean, to me, that's kind of like straight up, that seems to make the most sense of why you want to spec, because like you said, you can generate documentation. And now they can just look at that. You don't have to communicate as much, I would think. Are there any bigger problems that developers, maybe you would point out to developers who are in that situation, like here are the specific problems that you're having that would actually be solved by the spec?
Sure. So that's a good question. So yesterday at API Days, Kim Lane said something which I really like it, is documentation is the phase of the spec of the API, right? In this case, so the most usually the most interesting part in the beginning is to generate documentation. But I will not stop there. I think this is the easy part. Like it's easy to generate documentation, but in my case, it was about documentation in the beginning and also about code generation. We were creating a lot of microservices, and we were a small team, which is debatable. Now that I'm thinking about it, like why we were using so many microservices in a small team. But we were creating a bunch of microservices choreographed by messages on RabbitMQ. So as you can imagine, these services are never finished. So like all software, right? So whenever you had to add an update to one source code, to one source code base, you might want to extend this change to the other ones, right? You don't want to go in each of them go and change something, especially when it's something related to tweaking RabbitMQ or the library you're using or something like this, which is not business related. This was the case for us. We were all the time changing and improving things, and it was a pain. That's why we wanted a code generator. Like we want to generate the code, and please replace, the boilerplate code that we use replace it, so it's easy. So you could put it on a CI, on a CI/CD pipeline, and you can even get, I don't know, an automatic pull request or something, so you don't have to worry about it, or you don't have to do it manually. That's one thing. But over time, what the good thing is about specs, not just AsyncAPI, but actually it's more visible in OpenAPI nowadays, is to go beyond the documentation and the code generation, which is probably API management, right? So you can have API gateways that are validating your data whenever they receive an API request. They validate the data against OpenAPI, right? An OpenAPI definition, and that's not on your source code. That's on the API gateway. So it's not even hitting your service yet, right? And it might reply with an error, detailed error, or what failed, and or you let it pass, but you just throw a notification or I don't know if you're using something like Datadog, New Relic, or something. Whatever monitoring system you have, you can just throw an alarm or something like, hey, something bad is happening here. So this seems like very obvious for REST APIs, but it wasn't that obvious in the beginning for messaging APIs, because you're sending a message, but this nobody actually can guarantee that this message is going to contain the information that you're expecting in the shape that you're expecting, especially when you have lots of teams, or when you have lots of services and small team, or when you have partners. For instance, you're sharing some services and you allow some partners to inject data into your broker, for instance. This happens a lot of times as well. So how do you control that? How do you validate that? Are you going to validate this manually in every service? Is there a piece of infrastructure that can do this for you? If there is, how do you define this data? There's no spec. You can use JSON schema, for instance. You could do it with, or Avro, for instance. But there is usually this missing part, which is how do you connect to this API? Where is this broker located? What are the topics or channels? What are the channels or the topics available? And for each channel or topic, what's the messages that I can publish here? Because maybe you allow more than one message on each topic. You have like kind of one off, right? Or any off or something like this. So yeah, there are this kind of things that usually for API governance or management, right? That also happens to apply to messaging. And of course, from there, monitoring, testing as well. Think about it like, how are you testing your event-driven architectures if they are so decoupled? So one of the cool things about event-driven architectures is that they are super decoupled. You can add and remove services at any time. Yeah, that's really cool. But how do you then test that everything is working, the whole thing is working? So yeah, and even not just the whole thing, but that will be like an end-to-end test. But even like I said, how do you test that even just this message is containing the right information before you deploy to production? So this kind of things couldn't be automated, or if you wanted to automate it, you had to create your own solution based on Avro, JSON schema. Lately, well, I was going to say cloud events, but not even cloud events, because cloud events cloud events is just the envelope, but the data can be anything, right? Or XML as well, but yeah, with XXD, which I don't use it, but yeah, it is very frequent and normal on big businesses, right? On big corporations. So it's still there, and it's not gonna go anywhere soon. So
yeah, that makes sense. That is a pain point that I've often have is, just malformed or data not being expected as what the consumer thinks it's going to be or what they're expecting it to be. And because of the asynchrony of everything, how does the publisher know that there's an issue? Then you start getting into kind of like separate events to push back that are asynchronous, right? Not in like a compensating way, but I mean, I guess it's some reply of some fashion. But if you can kill that off right before that publish even occurs, to validate kind of the shape of what you're expecting, or even like superficial stuff of just like what, the type is of something, whether something's required, not required.
Look, Derek. So there's even something more interesting that I found after time working with this, is that there are other stuff that you could start doing. Like, for instance, if you want to start migrating all your services, as to something as stupid as let's add a created ad or updated ad field to all the messages because we need them, right? You either update all your code base, or you just have a piece in the middle that will inject this field for you. So you can do message manipulation. I'm not a fan of doing a lot of manipulations outside the microservice, let's say, or the service, but that's possible. And then you can do it right now, and then start slowly migrating your code base. So if it's there, it will not inject it, but if it's not there, it will inject it. So you can slowly roll out changes. But even things like encryption, right? So imagine that you want to send data, and this is very important if you want to do stuff outside your network with your partners or with the public using sensible data. Encrypting the data, right, on the messages, encrypting the message itself, so it's not legible by anyone in the middle, right, or anyone that could be receiving this by mistake, right? So this could be done at a level that not even the application knows that these messages are encrypted, right? The applications will not know that these messages are encrypted, because before they receive the message, there is a piece on the infrastructure that is going to decrypt it for them. And before they send the message to the broker, there's a piece on the infrastructure that is going to encrypt it for them. So they're not even aware that this is happening, right? But more importantly, I mean, this is like the kind of cool stuff that we could be doing. But more importantly to me is that what kind of pain points are we really solving? While I was working at New Relic, New Relic has one of the biggest Kafka clusters in the world. So the traffic that New Relic handles is higher than Twitter traffic. So you can imagine this is insane. So as you can imagine that almost every server in the world is using New Relic, or not almost every server, but lots of them, right? They have this, how was it called? The agent installed, and it's frequently sending data to New Relic. So, so imagine that you manually are tweeting every minute, right? So, so the amount of traffic that it generates, has to handle is insane. And not just this, but also the amount of the topics, the Kafka topics where the information has to flow is also insane. So what happened is, when someone was asking the question like, hey, do we have a Kafka topic where we can find this information? Nobody was able to reply. Like, I don't know, search for it on the code base. Maybe you find it by chance. Okay. I started doing it. Like, okay, let's try to find it. Let's dig deep in the code, and let's try to find these things. And I noticed it that there were sometimes like two or three topics containing the same information, and they all had traffic. So because nobody else, like, you need something and you start publishing information here, right? but nobody else knows that you're doing this, so they start doing it themselves as well, and you create duplicates, right? So that was one thing, but the most scary thing to me was that okay, so we want to migrate the information here. We want to migrate this to a new version, and it's going to be a breaking change on the message. So who's publishing this message? Can you tell me who's publishing this message? Which team is, so we can reach out to them and tell them to, I don't know, send the same information with a little tweak. Nobody knew like what was that said, but and I thought like, oh, okay, so maybe it's just New Relic, but then I mean, I suspected that it was not in Relic because honestly they have really good engineering culture and they're really good at it. So I started investigating a little bit more, and then Adidas and then other people as well where I've been working with, I realized they have the same problem, and it's like, it's normal. You start adding without control, without any. Some people have like kind of a directory they maintain themselves, which is good, but like documentation, like manually written documentation, has a problem that might not have been updated, and that's even worse because then you go there and you think that you got everything you need, and oh, surprise. There's something else in the production that you weren't expected, so some things break suddenly, right? So yeah, and things like this, like we want to remove, like for instance, people in charge of managing the cluster were like, okay, we need to remove weight from here, right? Like this is insane. Let's just remove things that are duplicate or not needed. And they started investigating. And said like, okay, we want to remove this topic. Who's using this topic? Who's subscribing, right? Who's subscribing to this topic? They could see some names there because when you subscribe with Kafka, you have these consumer groups and all this stuff. But most of the times, consumer groups were test A, test B. So it's like, or consumer group A, consumer group B. It's like, oh, who the hell is that people? So they couldn't just remove any topic, and you could only add, right? And that becomes a mess eventually, right?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to
eventually.
everything you're talking about. It's interesting because I always think about it's just these things that they're pain, like you said, but you need to be aware of how much it sucks sometimes. Maybe you just got to get to a certain scale where you're like, this is unmanageable. Because like when you were mentioning before, like finding like kind of duplicate or, oh, I need to do something in a particular way, but I have no idea. Nobody has any remembrance of whether something exists for that. And you're like, well, I can't really see anything. So then you end up creating something. And then 2 months later, you realize, oh, like there's a duplicate of this. Like somebody already created this. I've definitely experienced this. So, but it's one of those things where it's, I never really thought much about it until you're mentioning it right now. And it's like, oh yeah, this does happen. I mean, I don't know how frequent it happens, but it definitely happens. Or even the same thing of like just events, depending on the size of kind of where they're getting published from, is seeing events that are way too similar, right? It's like just way too similar. Like these pretty much represent the exact same thing for all intents. Like they're pretty much representing the exact same state change or something that happened, and 90% of the message itself is the same. So maybe some little tweaks, but
to me the funniest case that I've seen is I've seen, I think it was like 8 or 9 duplicate messages or topics, right? Different topics. One of them even being something like test or something like test whatever, and it was used in production. So it's like you're testing in development and you leave tests because you don't want to change it, or why not, right? So you deploy to production. But it was like 8 or 9, I can't remember now, topics with exactly the same information There was a small JSON information.
Yeah.
And it was exactly the same. And it's like 8-9 times. Nobody thought that this could have been, I don't know, like just search on the code base. And it took me like literally less than 5 minutes to find it on the code base. Of course, it was it was like 9 times there, right? So probably GitHub was indexing it really hard. So yeah, like it was to me it was funny, right? But it's true that until you have such scale, you don't have these problems, right? That's true. So that's one part. The other part that we want to also solve is actually creating an event-driven API, an asynchronous APIs or an event-driven architecture, a single API, let's say, the single service, publishing and subscribing. There's almost no boilerplate for this. You have to code it yourself. You have to go and jump into documentation and see how it's done with protocol X in language Y. So you just have to go there and figure out yourself how to do it. There are almost no libraries for that. There are almost no frameworks. So, and think about how easy it is to spin up an HTTP server nowadays in any language. And just create an HTTP API. It doesn't have to be REST, just an HTTP API, right? It's super easy, and it's super, I mean, in probably in 20 or 25 minutes, you have your HTTP API running and responding to you. If being this the first time you do it, if it's not the first time you do it, probably it takes you like 5 or 10 minutes to create one, right? That's not the case with asynchronous APIs. That you have to because you have to investigate a lot, because depending on the protocol you choose, it changes a lot, and depending on the language and the primary language you choose as well, it changes a lot. You might have frameworks for specific language and protocol, or you might not have anything, and you have to code it yourself. So that part we also want to solve it with AsyncAPI, right? So you just define what your interface is, and it will be like super quick that you get something that's working. You just need to fill in your business logic, like what's going to be published, when it's going to be published, not what, when this is going to be published, and what are you going to do when you receive this event. But the boilerplate code about sending, receiving, so sending, subscribing to a message, processing it, like doing CERDES, serialization and deserialization, and validating it at the code level. All the steps will be like kind of automated and opaque for you, right? So you should not be taking care of this. The same way when you're navigating, you don't take care of TCP packets being dropped by the network, right? You don't have to be taking care of this. Just type a URL and it works. The browser will take care of you for that, right? So that's, to me, that should be the same kind of experience, that you create something quickly and you just have to worry about your business logic.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
I know. I guess the last thing I want to touch on, is just kind of your announcement earlier this week. If you want to, I'll let you talk about it and just kind of where things are going now. Sure.
So I think it was like 3 days ago. Yeah, 3 days ago on 8. We announced our partnership with Postman. So what does it mean? Many people have been asking, what exactly does it mean? Is it Postman acquiring AsyncAPI? How is it going to affect AsyncAPI? And so first of all, I would love to say that this is going to change AsyncAPI, but in a good way. And this is not Postman acquiring AsyncAPI. I would love to clarify this. It's a partnership, and that means that they are investing in AsyncAPI because it's also good for them, not just for us, right? And because they want to become a multi-protocol product, right? So eventually it will be possible to use Postman with messaging protocols, not just HTTP, right? So that's
That would be awesome.
Sorry?
I said that would be awesome.
That would be awesome, actually, and that's one of the things that I will be helping them to achieve for next year. So that's so if they fail, just blame me. Right. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I wanted to clarify. It's not an acquisition. We remain independent. What we do is that we joined as employees of Postman. So I just joined as a director of engineering at Postman, and I'll be working 100% of my time, full time, to AsyncAPI, and the team will be working full time on AsyncAPI as well. And whatever we produce for AsyncAPI stays on AsyncAPI, right? Postman doesn't get even the IP or anything, right? So it's just remains on AsyncAPI, and because we don't have like a formal, how's it called? We're not a foundation, right? So we're not. It's just the project. The project is actually something virtual that is under my name right now. So to make it a little bit more stable and more solid, the first thing that we're gonna do in the next quarter is to host the project into a foundation, something like Linux Foundation, CNCF, Apache. We're just discovering and exploring which one will be the best, and come up with a governance model, right? An open source governance model, so to guarantee the success of the spec and the initiative itself, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Hey, would you have thought 4 years ago that this is where this would have landed? It's pretty crazy. Eh?
No, actually, no.
I know, eh?
I mean, you could say that I was not even imagining this by my commit messages. If I was even like suspecting that this could become something huge, I will not have used like something like work in progress.
Yeah.
whip initial commit, right? No, I was just like dumping code there in the repo, like it's a way to save it. If someone's interested in it, fine. I was already speaking about the synchronous APIs and what was the name? Choreographed microservices. So as an alternative model of orchestration, right? And I was already talking about that. I was going to conferences like Nordic APIs to talk about that, but not about AsyncAPI. But I was working already on AsyncAPI, but I thought like, who cares about this, right? It's like, I don't think anybody will care about this.
Yeah, it turns out there are. I don't know, James, you got any other thoughts or questions? I know I could talk about this stuff forever, but
yeah, I feel like there's quite a few other subjects that you hit up. Like testing for me that's a very interesting area, and like Derek and I had talked about that on one of the episodes. I had brought up this issue of, what if, certain microservices or services, whatever you want to call them, family contacts, whatever. They are decoupled, and that's kind of the point, is if I send a message out, I don't care who gets it. It's just, I know that if I get this message, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to test that I did the right thing, and then I'm sending, the right message out, which I can see Postman being, if we continue on, that would be really cool to be able to just kind of like build your test the way you can in Postman with your APIs, but then do that with your messaging, right? That would be very cool. But then there's this whole other area of like you're talking this end-to-end kind of test where it's like, I want to test that if I send this message, it's going to propagate through the whole system, and then eventually I can test kind of that end result. That's kind of a whole other topic we don't really have time to talk about, right? But it's like, we could keep going. I feel like that topic on its own is like, you just keep going and going and going. But that is very interesting that now Postman is going to be trying to support those kinds of scenarios. I think that's very cool. I'm very excited for you and for what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
I mean, like the code generation and documentation, that's very cool. But I feel like when you see how you can integrate that with your tests, I feel like that's kind of the culmination of everything, right? It's like, look what we can do.
Yeah.
I can just write my test in Postman for all my messages, and here are my test messages, and I'm gonna throw them in, and like that sounds very powerful. And then, like you said, you could do that. You could do that at the micro level, or do that at like a macro level too.
Exactly. So you can do it end to end, let's say, like a macro level, and you can have like kind of workflows, like what if I publish this event here, at some point that will be receiving another event on this other topic, because this will mean that something have worked behind the scenes. This could be like a initial approach to end to end. Not saying that we're going to do this, because we still have to explore what's the best way to test event-driven architectures, but this could potentially be something. And also would like to reinforce the why we're partnering with, or why we're doing this with Postman and not other companies, right? Like, as you probably have imagined, since 4 years, we're always talking about 4 years ago and now, but in the middle have happened a lot of things, right? And as you could probably have imagined, we already get this kind of similar offers of getting acquired, not just the spec, but the tooling. And yeah, we were always thinking like, it sounded interesting for us, like, damn, because you basically are running this out of your money and time. So yes, so at some point it's easy to find you burn out and say like, okay, fuck off, just gonna accept it, But yeah, I was lucky enough that we got really good sponsors, and I had enough money to continue this by myself, aside from being able to do consulting on my spare time if I had any, about AsyncAPI. So it was enough for me and for Lucas. Lucas is my friend working with me at AsyncAPI. So it was enough for me and for him to sustain the project, right? But it was not enough to make it bigger, to continue growing. And imagine, so multiply the number of programming languages by the number of protocols, by the number of definition formats like JSON schema, Avro, protobuf, right? So multiply all of them and make all the combinations, right? It's obvious that it's not a project for two, and probably you could also not rely on the community contributions only, because that's going to take a lot of time. And this really requires a team, a actually big team, or probably two, dedicated to this, right? So Postman came in and said like, hey, you know what? We want to support this, and we want to jump in and support what you're doing. We don't want to intervene anything or on anything you're doing. Like, you're doing what you're doing is great. We love it. We just want to give you support because that's what you need right now. So let's do it. And we thought that the best way to do it is exactly like this. So we just joined Postman and host the project into a foundation, because the other model could have been we seek for investment and found a startup ourselves. And we were already exploring that option. But yeah, investors, open source, not open source, specifications, standards, it's like there's a kind of conflict between standard and money and interest. So yeah, it wasn't really good for me, that option as well. So I had the feeling that talking to Abhinav, CEO of Postman, I had that feeling with Kim Ling as well, that these are the guys I want to work with, and they're they're honest. They're developers. So on top of that, so you talk to Abhinav, who is the CEO, right? And he's a developer. He just happens to be the CEO because he founded the company. But yeah, he's just he could be seen as another developer if you want. And you notice that when you are talking to them. And it's not like when you talk to a professional CEO, let's say, which is a businessman usually. And it's thinking more about the money than probably doesn't know anything about development or haven't experienced these problems in their life, right? So yeah, what I want to say here is that it was a match. It wasn't like we didn't take the first opportunity that we had, and we thought about it very deeply, and yeah, so we're super happy for that.
Yeah, I am too. I think it's really cool. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. We had to kind of move it around a couple times, but we made it happen. So it's good.
Yes.
I appreciate you taking the time. So for anybody else, or if you don't, AsyncAPI.com. You can find yourself on Twitter. I'll have links for that. But any other resources you want to, I guess, give out to people?
Yes. So aside from LinkedIn, which you can always also find us, we have a Slack channel, a Slack workspace that you can find on our website. So it's slack.com/Slack-invite. Oh, too many slash. So it's actually, I said AsyncAPI.com, not AsyncAPI.com/Slack-invite. Oh, it's complicated to pronounce for me.
Yeah, I can post a link too for those looking at this on YouTube. So